Okay, good morning, everybody. Got a request for this particular problem. This is lesson 5.8, and it's problem number 9. And it says sine of 4t plus sine of 2t equals 0. Now that seems like a pretty straightforward, easy problem at first, but there's a lot of algebra here. And I was just going to send you the solution, and I thought, well, they're going to need to see how to go through the steps. So here we go. The first one's one of the more difficult ones, I think, for people to think of. So the sine of 4t is actually the sine of 2 times 2t plus the sine of 2t equals 0. Okay, now I'm going to use my double angle formulas here. So we'll do it on this one first because this is the easiest one. Remember, the sine of 2t is equal to 2 times the sine of t times the cosine of t. And so we're going to do the same thing here. This is going to be 2 times the sine of 2t times the cosine of 2t. And now I've got to do the same thing again right here. I got to do the double sine problem again. So this is going to be 2 times, and then this is going to be 2 sine t cosine t times the double cosine formula. That's going to be cosine squared t minus sine squared t. You can get those right off your formula sheet. Plus 2 sine t cosine t equals 0. Okay, so then if you look really carefully here, I've basically got two terms. I've got a term here and I've got a term here, and both of them have a 2 sine t cosine t, and so I'm going to factor out that 2 sine t cosine t. So I get 2 sine t cosine t, and I'm left with this 2 with this stuff, 2 cosine squared t minus sine squared t, plus if I factor the 2 sine t cosine t out of there, I just get 1. Okay. So then I've got to kind of consolidate this stuff a little bit in here. Now, remember cosine squared t, that is the same thing as 1 minus sine squared t. So I'm going to change this to 1 minus sine squared t minus another sine squared t plus 1. Got too many parentheses in here. Okay. Now I can combine my like terms here. So this is 1 minus 2 sine squared t. And of course I bring down my 2 sine t cosine t right here. Now I'm going to go ahead and distribute my 2 inside here. So this becomes 2 sine t cosine t times 2 minus 4 sine squared t plus 1. Keep putting that in the wrong place. And I can combine my like terms here. So that makes 3 minus 4 sine squared t. And over here I get 2 sine t cosine t. Okay, at this point, this is going to break up into 2 separate problems now, because I've got this times this equals 0, which means either this is 0 or that's 0. So I can break this thing up into two separate problems. 2 sine t cosine t equals 0. And 3 minus 4 sine squared t equals 0. Okay, now I can solve both of these independently. So this one here, I'm going to change this back. This is the double sine formula. This is sine 2t equals 0. And so then I arc sine 0, and I get t equals plus 2 pi k. That's 0, and that's also pi. Oh, by the way, this is between 0 is less than or equal to t is less than 2 pi. So this is going to be 2t equals 0 plus 2 pi k, and it's also 2t equals pi plus 2 pi k. And if I divide both of those by 2, I ran out of room here. Let's move this. If I divide both those by 2, I get t equals 0 plus pi k, and t equals pi over 2 plus pi k. So the answers I'm going to get out of this part are going to be 0, pi over 2. I add pi to that, I get pi. Add pi to that, I get 3 pi over 2. If I add pi to that, I get 2 pi, but that's outside because it's not included there. So I got 4 answers from that part. Okay, now I'm going to take the other part and solve it. Hopefully I have enough room here. So 3 minus 4 sine squared t equals 0. So I subtract 3 and divide by negative 4, and I'm going to get sine squared t equals the square root of 3 over 2. And then I'm going to square root, I'm sorry, that's 3 over 4. I'm going to square root that, and I'm going to get t equals plus or minus the square root of 3 over 2. Okay, so then, sine t equals that. So now I've got an arc sine plus or minus square root of 3 over 2. And so, I hope you can see this. So that gives me 4 more answers. That gives me pi over 3, gives me 2 pi over 3, gives me 4 pi over 3, and it gives me 5 pi over 3. So this problem has 8 answers to it in that range right there. Hope this helps.